The list. 10 events that led directly to the Civil War. The following 10 events are in order of occurrence, each becoming more violent than the previous and each playing a role in the eventual dissolving of the Union and formation of the Confederate States of America. This is part 2 of the lecture, events 6 through 10. Number 6. The caning of Charles Sumner. While violence was going on in Kansas, blood was also being shed in the nation's capital. In late May, Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts delivered a speech attacking pro-slavery forces in Kansas. His speech was filled with insults and even made fun of A.P. Butler, a pro-slavery senator from South Carolina. Preston Brooks, a relative of Butler, heard about Sumner's speech. To defend the South, he went to the Senate floor, walked over to Sumner, who was sitting at his desk. Brooks then went on to hit Sumner over the head with a cane. Sumner tried to defend himself, but his legs were trapped. Brooks hit him 30 times or more, breaking his cane in the assault. Many Southerners applauded Brooks for his actions, but many Northerners were shocked at the violence in the Senate. Bleeding Kansas and Bleeding Sumner became rallying cries for abolitionists and slogans for a new political party, the Republican Party. Number 7. Dred Scott versus Sandford. This is the 5th and final Supreme Court case you will be expected to know this year. The Supreme Court decision will tear the country into 2 sections. Dred Scott had become a slave in Missouri, a slave state. His owner took him to live in territories where slavery was illegal. Then they returned to Missouri. His owner had promised Dred Scott his freedom, but died before granting it. Miss Sandford, the owner's wife, and a friend of hers who was a lawyer in New York, persuaded Scott to sue for his freedom. They were hoping that Dred Scott would win and would set a precedent for other slaves who were living in the North. Scott agreed to sue. His lawyer argued that Scott was a free man because he had lived in territories where slavery was illegal. His case reached the Supreme Court in 1856. After hearing the case, the Supreme Court ruled against Scott. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney delivered his opinion on the case, saying that Dred Scott was not a U.S. citizen and therefore had no right to sue the U.S. courts. Taney also ruled that Scott was bound by Missouri Slave Code because he lived in Missouri. Taney then went on to argue that Missouri Slave Code, that Congress could not ban slavery in any territories. To do so would violate the slaveholders' property rights, which are protected by the Fifth Amendment, because slaves are property. As a result, slavery was open to all parts of the United States, not just the southern states. The Missouri Compromise line was also ruled unconstitutional. Number 8. Harper's Ferry. In 1859, John Brown, who had been the leader of the Pottawatomie Massacre, left Kansas and fled to Harper's Ferry, Virginia, where the U.S. had a large weapons arsenal storehouse. Brown had a plan. He wanted to inspire slaves to fight for their freedom. To do this, he planned to capture the weapons in the arsenal and arm the slaves. On October 16, 1859, Brown and 18 followers captured the Harper's Ferry arsenal. They killed 4 people in the raid. Brown then sent out the word to rally and arm local slaves, but no slaves joined the fight, scared that they would be harshly punished by their masters if they were not successful. The U.S. Marines attacked Brown at Harper's Ferry. Some of his men escaped, but Brown was captured. He was tried for murder and treason. He was convicted and sentenced to hang. Northern abolitionists cheered for Brown, as the South were enraged and horrified by the Northern reactions to this attack. Number 9. The 1860 presidential election. The presidential election of 1860 was a pivotal moment in American history. There were 4 candidates for president in this election. Stephen Douglas for the Northern Democrats, John Breckinridge for the Southern Democrats, John Bell for the Constitutional Union Party, and Abraham Lincoln for the Republican Party. There were two different races for presidency, one in the North, one in the South. Lincoln defeated Douglas in the North, and Breckinridge defeated Bell in the South. Because there were more Northern electoral votes, Lincoln won the election. Lincoln promised that he would not try to abolish slavery. But white Southerners did not trust him. Many were sure that he and the other Republicans would move to ban slavery. As a result, white Southerners saw the Republican victory as a threat to the Southern way of life. South Carolina had made it clear before the election that if Lincoln won, they would secede from the Union. They held true to their promise. Number 10, the South secedes. After Lincoln's victory, supporters of secession demanded the South withdraw from the Union, basing their arguments on the idea of states' rights. They argued that the states had voluntarily joined the Union, therefore the states also had the right to leave the Union. On December 1860, South Carolina became the first state to secede. Other states in the Deep South, where slave labor and cotton production were most common, also considered secession, and within the next 6 weeks, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas joined South Carolina in secession. In early February 1861, the states that had seceded met in Montgomery, Alabama. They formed the Confederate States of America. The convention named Jefferson Davis President of the Confederacy. The Civil War had begun.